TVOT.
And now I'd like to introduce Michael Collette, who is principal at Media Tech Strategies, and he is a new columnist with us in a column called Industry. And I named that with Michael because he really does know the industry and passionate about that and how that works. And he's here to talk to you about how ACR and the industry are working together. Correct? And he also recently was CEO of Ucentric Systems, if you recall. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Tracy. All right, so thanks a lot. Yeah, this panel, for me, it's actually a lot of fun. I've been trying to figure out how to make interactive television work in various roles and with various people in the room for a long time. And very recently, I started to see something change, which I thought was very important, which was the emergence of technologies from companies like Zytera that will allow televisions to be aware of what they're displaying. Up till now, smart TVs can run applications and they can run TV, but the applications don't know what's on TV, right? For me, this is a big deal because now all of a sudden we can take the reach and the power of the audience that television delivers today, and we can now extend that and we can drive applications from it. And I hypothesize personally that this has the potential to restore growth to the television ad spend market, which is just up for the last 5, 7, 10 years, has been flat at around $60 to $70 billion, largely because the internet has arisen during that time with advertising options that include targeting, that include engagement, and have a lot more measurement. With ACR-enabled TVs, those virtues now come to TV advertising potentially and to our ability to extend TV advertising with applications. So the broad topic here is hybrid interactive television, where broadband and broadcast come together through ACR, and what the potential is to transform the television industry. All right, that's the topic. So, panelists today. We have Sam Chang, the General Manager of Smart TV Planning, Strategy, and Key Partner Management at LG Electronics. Very happy to have Sam. Dan Akins, CEO of Zytera, one of the startups involved in ACR, both for TVs, and, Dan, you got it right, and mobile devices. Chris Faulkner, one of the leaders in New York of the advanced advertising community for NBCU. Zane Vella, CEO of RCDB, and Marcelino Ford-Levine from Intel. He's the general manager of interactive content and advanced advertising development. The topics today. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of break this out into 5 general topics. So, is this really different? What's the potential of this, right? What's going on now that makes this approach to interactive television somehow better than some of the others that have maybe tried and not done so much to change the world thus far? Based on that, what's the potential of this? What kinds of things can we do? And by this, I mean the business and creative potential, all right? So what sorts of transformations can occur? What are the issues? What kinds of things do we have to overcome in order for this to actually really happen? As sort of a subset of that, in this new world, my TV is building a log file of what I'm watching. That stimulates an obvious question about privacy, and we should address it. So we can talk a bit about privacy. And then, generally, what's the outlook? What is the timing of this? What's the prognosis for the growth of this business? We had a bunch of ACR discussions on the previous panel. I'm actually going to ask Dan to kick us off here with a quick overview of really what we mean by ACR on TV. This is the one-screen model, predominantly, although he does both. And with that, let me go ahead and pull up your presentation. Can you give me the presentation live, please? So, do you want me to drive for you, or would you like to do it yourself?
I'm Dan Akins. I'm the CEO of Zytera, and we are a technology provider of fingerprinting technology. You could also think about our technology type in the class as also being watermarking. So it's basically an automatic content recognition technology that allows a device, in this case a TV, to establish what piece of content is being displayed at the moment it's on. What this slide here gives is just a general overview of how the workflow in a smart TV environment works. Where you, and this can be the same for second screen devices as well, but since we're talking about smart TVs here, you basically have programs, TV, advertisement stuff, and at the front end with the producers, application developers, the people at the ad agencies would decide what type of interactive content they want to have happen with their video and their audio. And essentially, they ingest that content and they say at a certain time frame, I want this to happen, I want that to happen. To us, it really doesn't matter, as we're just a triggering engine. We allow interactivity to occur with whatever someone wants to have happen at that point. And then you basically create fingerprints. Now, at this point, you could also insert a watermark, but in our case, we don't change content. We just derive a set of signatures, we put it in a database, and we build a database here of everything that's on TV, similar to the Into Now strategy. And then what you can do is you can have the content owner now have access to a device, such as a smart TV, when it's actually displaying the content. Now, the content owner can have control of that device. And the content owner now can say, oh, I want the TV to squeeze back at this point in time, or I want it to overlay this ad at this point in time. Because in the end, it's the content owner's content, and our business is really how to connect the content owner and the device manufacturers. And so we're basically providing this bottom layer and all the technology and pieces needed for that. Okay? So, okay. Yeah, this thing's a little funky. Sorry, man. So. So I mean, it's kind of the holy grail of this business. That what we got started with is how to actually have this scenario happen. You have content, you have a child watching it, let's say. You don't really want to deliver a beer ad to a kid, but how do you know the kid's in the room, and how do you deliver an ad that's more appropriate to a kid? And so in this case, what you can show is you basically create a fingerprint of the ad at post-production. You can basically push the fingerprint to the database on the TV. And then as the ad is broadcast, it's caught in the TV. And then within like 100 milliseconds, you can decide where that ad is. And if you also have a little bit of information from the TV network, you can basically insert a new ad at that point. And so you have this ability now to do highly targeted and special ads on a TV set, which you could never do before in TVs. And so this gives higher CPMs, essentially. It can be a very big new revenue source for people like NBC. So the same thing here, basically. It's very similar to what Adam was talking about. You want interactive advertising. You can then basically send an ad to a woman for cosmetics. Advertising, this has actually got the wrong title, but in this case, what you're doing is you can actually have polling, you can do something interactive, you can put a coupon, you can put any of these devices and actually send the fingerprint there, and on the TV, you can recognize it and have that type of interactivity occur. One of the other things we've been looking at is really cool, I think, uses. One is on a game show. Can you actually have people at home interact with a game show while it's being on TV? So can you actually have people compete with the actual contestants on the TV program? Could you use this as a way of actually getting people to come to the show? And so this is one of the things we're working on. So basically, you have the home-based program. You actually allow the interactivity to happen, and you allow all these prizes and so forth to be given to the end user. And then, of course, there's all the mobile ACR synchronous two-screen device, uses. What's on TV, similar to the Into Now application. That all can be done with this type of technology. They're all very similar at the very lower level, all very similar technologies. It's just basically how do you want to use them.
Great, thanks. Okay, you can kill the screen now, thanks. So, as a general kind of overview, what we're describing here then is the ability for a broadcaster to trigger events on a TV. You're in a sense creating an event manager, right? And Chris can then sell or decide from a content standpoint what event he wants to trigger on that screen. And Sam's going to set some rules around how that might actually happen in terms of presentation layer, how the consumer invitation occurs, right? I mean, so this is essentially a general architecture for doing whatever you want on an interactive, on a smart television, with time-based triggers coming off of live TV or the time-shifted version of live TV. The ACR system does not care whether you're airing off the live system, off of a VOD plant, off of DVR, doesn't care. So from your guys' perspective, let's just go ahead and throw it open to the panel. There have been lots of attempts at interactive television. You've seen a lot of them. How is this different for you? And how does this compare? I mean, is this actually a different kind of opportunity by comparison to other interactive television systems we've seen? What's your sense for it? Go ahead, Chris, please do.
Well, I think the one thing that it allows us to do is as you said, there's been a number of different ways of doing TV interactivity, whether it's eBIF through Canoe or directly through the MSOs, whether it is applications that use either a smart tablet or a phone or even just simple SMS to do some basic interactivity. This allows us to actually leverage the internet connected part of the TV, so you can do presentation on that big screen that's hanging on the wall with the interactivity, as opposed to, and really make it a one screen kind of interaction versus some of the others which are either one to many or you have to be doing it on a second device. So I think that's the piece that's exciting for us. And we like the fact that we don't view this as just advertising. We view this as content owners. We view this as stuff to be able to use this across programming as well. Right. So that you drive viewership, drive interaction, drive the attention to the program itself.
Actually, follow-up question for you. So there seems to be a new question emerging, which is kind of what's better for application providers and for programming networks and their show producers. Is it actually better to have the interaction occur on the second device, away from what I'm airing, or do I want to keep the attention on the screen? I think it's an open question. I don't think we're going to answer it for a few years, but I think it's a really interesting question. Any reactions to that early on? Speculation.
Well, I think technology may drive you that you end up having to play with whatever the limits of the consumer premises are. So if somebody has an internet-connected TV, you may be able to do some of the experience on the big screen. You may want some of it on the big screen. You may want to drive it to a secondary screen if you're able to connect the two. If you pair essentially a tablet or even a smartphone to a TV, right, you may drive the interactivity from the big screen to have the person use the second screen.
Yeah, I was just thinking, it seems to me that television programming producers care an awful lot about keeping a consumer's attention. And so is engagement on the screen more valuable than engagement on a second screen where I might actually be incurring distraction too?
You're asking me to get into the mind of Dick Wolf?
Yes. Sam, how about you? What's different? What's new about this stuff?
Well, I've also been in this space about, I think, 12 years, maybe a little shorter or longer than some of you. And I think what is really different, and I'd like to maybe a little detour, and a lot of the questions I think here, and I was in Digital Hollywood 2 weeks ago, one of the first questions they asked me when they realized I work for a TV company is, so what platform do you guys run in? What operating system? And it's really a wrong question, because if you think about it, and it really is what's different than 10 years ago, a TV is a perfect web platform. It's always on. Screen size is always 16 by 9, so you can deliver everything through the web. And LG and other CE makers for past, I think, 18 months, including Philips, been embedding web browser, not as a user paradigm, but a development framework. So you can actually deliver whether it's application or video over the web. And we also announced a partnership with Brightcove, which I think is here today, as well as Uyala, which is our known online video delivery platform. So you can actually deliver whether it's video or video-based advertising from the cloud, and you don't really care what platform it is, whether it's a PC, iOS, or Android. So ability to take the web and minimize fragmentation, I think is what is really different. Right. So second thing I think is different is related to ease of use. I think there was a lot of excitement when a Google TV announcement came out maybe 6-9 months ago, and I think the reason people were really excited was they saw the new potential way to combine both live, MVPD or live TV, with over-the-top content. Then when the product came out, and I think someone mentioned it earlier today, a lot of excitement went down. And because some of it was based on kind of web TV-like content, concept with keyboard. And I think one of the key things they missed is when you try to drive new usage model, really requires a new input paradigm. So I think there's a meeting, another session right after this one, related to input technology. And we actually been working with a company called Hillcrest. And if I can actually show a little bit of we're shipping a remote that looks like this, which is a motion-based remote. So it has all the traditional channel up volume, but you can also do a selection. So just as when iPod came out and a flywheel really changed the paradigm, how you interact with the MP3 player, and iPhone came out with a touch, I think those kind of changes are required to drive interactivity, both on the single screen as well as two screen. Then I think in conjunction to this ACR, which is automatic content recognition. Actually, I'd like to use a different terminology, which is, I'm a technologist, I'm an engineer, but when you ask a consumer, what are the things you like about mobile phone? It's not necessarily the CPU or big screen. It's, well, a lot of people say, well, it knows where I am, and I can do a lot of things like location-based services. So as we talk about ACR, it's really content-based services. I can deliver better personalization, better application based on what you're watching. And on the flip side, we can go to the advertisers by knowing what they're watching before or they're going to watch last week or next week. We can actually deliver better advertising. So I think that's what's different this time compared to, let's say, 12 years ago.
Okay. Please.
I think maybe I'm going to try and catch the softball pitch of what you started out with, and that is and from the panel just before and talking now, you're talking about, in a way, a synchronization model or this ACR model. I think it's useful to just for a second mention what some of the competing models are or other ways of thinking about interactive television so we can group them. We're really just coming, I think, we're on the tail end of the app model of interactive TV. But I think that was kind of all the rage for a couple years, right? That the TV would just be apps. And now we have more of a move toward synchronization. And I think over the last 2 decades, we've seen different technologies try and do that, right? Like in a way, you could go as far as what was the company, Wink, that did content in the vertical blanking interval? Right? Like that was another kind of context-aware, context-sensitive interactivity. So those are the 2 big models to try and organize. And one of them knows what you're watching, and the other one doesn't, right? That's really what this boils down to. It's an app where you're just turning the computer, the TV, treating it more like a computer and doing something new with it, or there's watching video and you could do something synchronized. And so with that distinction, the distinction I'd like to make is between knowing the show that someone's watching, which is interesting, or the commercial, but I think more importantly, knowing what's happening at a particular moment in a program, what the emotional resonance is, correct, context, what the emotional resonance is of a program at a particular point in time. And I think because this really all comes down to user experience, I'd like to put out to the panel that what you actually need is deep contextual understanding of what's happening at that moment in the program so that you can then deliver the appropriate experience around that.
Right.
No, that's a great point. And I think I'd probably add to the original question, what's different? Well, the potential for scale is an obvious one.
Right.
Doesn't matter how many false starts have been, if you can't scale this thing out to the number that would appease a programmer or an advertiser such that they can double down and...
I just, you can't see it, they all can. I was studying all this for a client, and I was shocked when I built this for them. It kind of was just a little picture myself. This is showing the reach of different interactive television systems that are out there in the market today, as measured kind of by the ads that they're able to interactively enable. And you'll note that there's really local ads in any broadcast television feed, and there's national or network ads. And what's really interesting is if you look at the different interactive television options we have out there, we still suffer today, prior to the arrival of the connected TV, from a really bad balkanization problem. And it's always been an issue because Procter & Gamble really doesn't want to invest in something that reaches a small portion of the market. Right? It has to scale to television. And connected TVs are the first thing that don't have any network dependence. It really doesn't matter how the feed gets there. And the ACR service embedded in the TV doesn't care whether it came over satellite or cable or broadcast, right? It's a huge deal. This means local broadcasters, for example, whether their service goes over the air or through the cable system, now have a way to have an interactive app for the local Ford dealer. That's really different. The other thing, guys, because I did partially answer the question myself, behind you, there's also a little, that's my nature. I'm a consultant. There's a quick summary of the power of a connected TV and how it compares to the other interactive television system. Again, this came out of, I was trying really hard over the fall to field what I thought was a pretty rudimentary interactive television app. And I just kept running into basic limitations. You know, data networks that take 3 days to gather data back. I won't say where that comes from. I have some networks that simply don't have a return path. I have no networks that can reach the cloud in real time before the connected TV. These things really matter, right? I mean, if we want to appify television, we got to have real apps. We can't run Pong, okay? So I thought this was, to me, a lot of what was different was the combination of reach and power. Anything to add to that? Sorry, it was my own little point.
You took the words right out of my mouth.
Cool.
I guess the only thing I'd add to that is probably the, the application development environment, HTML5, Flash, being able to use development tools that are widely available as opposed to maybe being beholden to a kludgier set of tools that are perhaps a little onerous on the standard side, and it might preclude some folks from really going out and creating a lot of apps and services.
Cool. Let's go back to your point, because actually that notion of advertising in context is a big deal in the television business, in the upfronts right now, right? We hear about this a lot. Your company does this a little differently. It's still about content awareness, but why don't we go ahead and show your video since we're on the topic. Can we switch to, Ernie, can we switch away from PowerPoint into video?
So we're just going to take a quick look at something we did a deeper dive into. This is an experience called Watch with eBay. We're developing in conjunction with eBay in a prototype phase. Actually, do you mind starting it again? I think it went a little bit quick. I apologize if that's easy. What this is first you're going to see what you would see on a TV. In this case, the synchronization is actually happening with eBIF. So it asks you if you want to participate. You say yes. You go and enter the code into an iPad, and now the iPad app actually knows what you're watching and the moment of the program. And in this particular application, we're able to take the product data, so the contextual information about what is happening in the scene, and then use that to go out and search for current auctions and available products on eBay. And that's one of the reasons I think that we're talking about scale, because, well, eBay is able to actually provide a decent amount of scale. There's certainly a lot of the products that are available in the programs are available there. And the means for actually connecting that or creating that synchronization can either be using the eBIF infrastructure or using something like Zytera's recognition technology. In a smartphone or a tablet, listens to where you are and starts that up. Now, we do not really think that the entire world wants to watch with eBay only. But I think that the exciting thing is to think about what does your customer, what does the audience member want to watch with? Do they want to watch with their friends? Do they want to watch with a particular brand? Do they want to watch with a character, one of the particular characters from the show, right? And taking that idea and using that as the baseline of user experience. What is that synchronized experience? Once I've got them connected, now what do I do? We're at day one. And I think it is really exciting to see the glimmer of something that can scale and that can provide a great experience.
And maybe just to get geeky for a second, you called out something kind of interesting at a technical level that's worth noodling just for a second. And that is, you have a fingerprint system that's essentially generating asset ID. This is an episode of The Closer. And then time code or event data, right? In the cloud, Zane can go in and author time data, and here's a Coke promo, here's Jennifer's sweater, damn it, we will sell it eventually. Whatever it is, but with using the cloud, we can really associate any metadata body. The discussions we had around ad ID and ITR this morning is another metadata body that can be associated with the knowledge of what's on TV, shooting that out to the cloud and saying, all right, what do you want to do? Right? So it's an extremely powerful capability that we're building that has a lot of different use cases. All right, so actually I want to turn back to Chris for a second. Last year when we were here, there was a lot of hullabaloo around Canoe. Still is. Still hope that really gets going. And I think that stimulated a fair amount of discussion back in New York among advertisers and producers and so forth in things interactive television. I guess I'm curious, your sense of the marketplace and the pent-up demand or not? Do people know how to use this? I mean, is this going to have a sort of slow-rolling early adopter, late adopter kind of curve, or is there a fair amount of interest in using this from what you see from the television marketplace?
Well, again, I'll go back to saying that I don't think this is a commercial advertiser-only type of product. I think the way we actually drive adoption of people downloading an app to something, you have to go in and be prompted and download an app to your TV, whether it's an NBC Universal app or a Bravo app or an E app. You're not going to do that so that the Coke ad does something fun. You're going to do that because you're engaged in the programming, and therefore you're driven to do that. So I think, first of all, I would say that that's part of the premise, is that this is not just advertising, this is content in general. And I think from an advertiser perspective, the spectrum is there. You have some advertisers that have done a lot of this. You look at the other platforms that exist today, and there are certain sets of advertisers who do a lot of interactivity, do a lot of other things along companion content with their ads. There are some advertisers that getting, doing an RFI, getting that customer to raise their hand, that's important to them. You go to an auto guide to get somebody to say, yes, I'm interested in your product. A qualified lead to them is worth a lot. Yeah. So I think you do have people that are interested. Other folks, you have to see where it fits into their business model.
Gotcha. All right.
I think it'll take 10 years.
Yeah?
I hope not.
Well, I think that it will really take another 10 years to build on this moment in time, the ability to know the context of a show and then the ability to start adding something to it. I think it's going to take a significant amount of time.
We'll come back to that because I think the timing of this market's really interesting. Personally, I think it happens faster than that, but I'll show a graphic later why. Go ahead, something?
Yeah, just one of the things I was going to say is I do think that there might be levels that happen in 10 years that we can't imagine today, but I do know that there's TV shipping in the market right now that do this, and there's portals where you can publish site to, you can do interactive content with it, you can do it with the ads. There are other TVs that I know that are coming out on the market that will have this capability. There are broadcasters working on this. So I do know that from all the stuff is there, especially with eBIF and all the work that's done there. There's companies like InSequence, there's providers of all the middleware, how to manage the entire workflow process. So all the pieces are there. You have huge, big capacity networks, millions of TVs out there. So stuff will happen. Now, it might be the Holy Grail takes 10 years, but I do think that there is a lot that's going to happen over the next couple of years.
Right. I don't mean to be shooting us in the foot. What I'm really saying is I think it'll be 10 years until every moment of television has something behind it.
Oh, God, let's hope that doesn't ever happen.
And the question is, do we actually want that?
Yeah.
I think people will demand it. I think it will be the only way that the television will be monetizable, like when you have that much over the top, right? When we've gotten exactly what executives have been saying for years, exactly what you want, when you want it, where you want it. Well, when that happens, it's really hard to sell a 30-second spot.
Right.
Right. So the only way to monetize that will be for the moment, right? For you to be able to push into the moment of television to get something from there. I mean, I know you sell advertising, but right? It's harder. It would be a lot harder to sell 30-second spots in a completely fragmented world.
Well, maybe the analog would be how many banner ads are sold that don't have an ability to click on them? Probably none. So eventually, you think about what are ads? Ads are essentially trying to get a consumer to do something, think something, say something. Well, you're going to want them to be able to do something. So I'm not sure 100%, but, well, maybe. Who knows? Sam?
Well, I guess in some sense I agree that I think it's going to take probably 10 years. If you look at today, the broadband penetration in US still, I think, close to only 70 or 80%. So it's not 100% yet. But I think if you look at two vectors, in terms of the connect to CE, I think a lot of makers, including LG, came out that about 80% of our lineup will be smart enabled in the next 2-3 years. So there's a lot of adoption happening there. Also, I think if you look at the advertising, it's going to be gradual. It's going to be enhancement. So it's not completely all or nothing. I heard a statistic that about 80% of new car lease are sold in 20% of the zip code in US. So even if you get 20 or 30% scale, I still think it's very effective for certain advertising.
Sure.
So answer is 100% yes, it will take actually 20 years, but to be effective, maybe, a lot shorter.
That's interesting. I think you might have been talking about content, and I think you're talking about household penetration, which are different. And for household penetration, we've got 300 million TVs to replace, so that will take a while, and I'm sure you're looking forward to that. You too. So, Marshall, I'm curious with the technology, the platform guys, what do you guys see as the major, what's going on at a platform level in terms of the power of these TVs, and what's holding back 100% of the product lineup being smart? So where is the platform going now over the next couple of years?
Well, I think the direction that we're seeing is a lot more performance headroom in the actual silicon. System on a chip architecture, which means that, if we cracked open one of the TVs there, you'd see different discrete processors in there handling different functions. Well, those are now being fused onto one chip, which means, assuming you have all the IP licenses and building blocks, you have a really robust architecture that powers, the same robust computing that powers your laptop or your PC experience can now be brought into the living room. The trick is obviously how do you pull that off and not have it be a left brain, right brain type of experience. Left brain, I'm surfing the internet, right brain, I'm kicking back in couch potato mode. The trick is how do you integrate those two. But I think from a performance standpoint, the processors and the underlying hardware have the ability to support a wide variety of software stacks, which means things like content identification can run effectively, whether it's fingerprinting or watermarking capabilities, whether you're supporting proprietary stacks, Blu-ray stacks, conditional access stacks. So now more than ever, I think connected CE devices, television sets, potentially Blu-ray players, call them buddy boxes like your Apple TV, your Logitech box, these types of CE devices that we all buy at Walmart, Target, Best Buy, Costco, will have this capability to support a variety of technologies.
Okay. All right, so open question for the panelists. We're going to switch from kind of what the potential is to what some of the short-term implementation issues are. What are the challenges that we have to overcome to make this a business? And I imagine they are actually quite different for each of the people at the table. So whomever would like to jump in.
I'll start. So one of the big challenges we have with putting this type of technology in a TV is TVs want to query all the time. You have an application where a user is at home and they want to track something. It's probably 100,000, maybe 10,000 times less often than a TV would. So what we're building is a back-end infrastructure that can handle queries of like thousands and thousands per second. There was some data on the last panel that said something like, an average of 1 check-in per second or 17 per second, or even a billion over 10 months. We can easily have billion queries in a month.
Right.
So this is a big challenge to the infrastructure for any of these technologies to handle. And so, anything else, that's probably the biggest challenge we face.
I can add to that. Last year, my team spent the better part of a year looking at different content identification technologies. And we saw a lot of great demos, but we didn't see anything actually integrated with the direction of being able to run at scale on 10 million TVs.
Right.
So the question for us that we look at as we identify technologies out there that could do this in our platforms is, what's their ability to run at scale and not crash the TV? And then, a host of other business and operational issues, as Dan and I have talked about this for the better part of last year as well. How do you actually make it work? We have to really ping that back end. We kind of joke, we likened it to different levels of service, if you will. There's a bronze level of capability, a silver level of capability, and a gold level of capability when it comes to being able to identify this stuff in real time. So
The response time of the identification.
exactly.
Yeah. So, when you showed two very different apps in terms of the response time demand, popping up an interactive application that says, would you like a coupon for Tide? That's kind of time insensitive. If that takes 2 or 3 seconds, we don't care. It could be a bronze app. But if you actually want to replace an ad dynamically on the fly, that's platinum, right? That might be above gold. So you have very little time to make a decision and get buffers filled and all that fun stuff. So there's some nuance to ACR and how it scales and some of the time-related issues. That arrival curve's evil because it's broadcast TV, right? So everything's happening almost at the same time.
I think the biggest problem is fragmentation for the content owner. I think the biggest problem is, great, you have, well, just let me see, how many people here, what percentage of the audience represent content owners? So it's kind of sporadic in there. Maybe you would agree, there are so many opportunities, so many interactive things that you can do. Which do you go after? Like, which platforms do you go after? Just in the connected TV space alone, you have the decisions between, do I build HTML5? Isn't that the future? Do I work with Flash? Do I do this? Do I do that? Do I do eBIF? Do I work with the proprietary platform that someone can show me 125 million apps downloaded? There's so many choices, and there's so little resources, and the revenue is somewhat inconsequential, that to move it forward, you have to find small steps that you can take that will actually cover a lot of territory. And so that's one of the reasons why we've positioned ourselves just as metadata, right? So we work with content owners so that they can actually define that related content metadata on their programs. We don't talk about it that way. That's pretty nerdy. When we're talking with a show owner, we say, you can bake in your product data now. Right? You can bake in your prop list.
Yeah.
So you don't ever have to do that later. And by talking the language of production and by helping content owners realize that their metadata is money, right? That the metadata is money, and that as all of these platforms pop, as there's content recognition built into LG's line, as there are cool cell phone apps that will recognize it, as there's brain implants that will project it over your mind's eye, then you can actually go back to all that content you baked in that metadata and drive some kind of commerce from, some kind of expanded experience. So I think the problem is fragmentation.
So that's interesting. I think that actually as the connected TV universe gets large, we'll have some fragmentation because of Samsung TV and an LG TV and an Intel processor and the services it offers, and some of the other processors and the services they offer are a little different. But the one thing that's good about this domain is it's fast and cheap to build versions of an app, all right? So creative versioning, it can take a year to do a couple versions of an app in some of those other environments, right? It's relative to the potential audience and so forth. I think that's kind of less of an issue.
It may be fast and cheap,
Yeah.
but so are the budgets.
Yeah, fair enough. But again, I'm arguing that budget problem starts to diminish as the number of TVs I can reach. It's a fixed cost against a large audience, right? It doesn't get bigger when we go from 1 million to 10 million TVs. The cost is the same. What I ran into when I was working with my little client, thank you, was actually what we called the wallet dipping problem. And we would kind of go to the network first, and we would think we would do business with the network to get our app launched. And then the network would tell us, well, okay, but you're going to have some kind of a revenue share for Sam. And, some of my people were saying, geez, if it's on a Yahoo-enabled TV, Yahoo's going to want a piece. And, gee, Dan, he got to get paid too. Before too long, the ecosystem of people who all want their CPM-based divvy gets kind of heavy. And, Walmart and Best Buy are going to stick their hands out too if we're not careful, right? I don't think there's an answer in this panel to that question, but I just want to point out that, to me, one of the things that really is going to take a little time is to work out the trading relationships between the different large partners, many of whom have never done business together like this before, right? So kind of a general open question, to be determined. Let's switch to the subset problem, privacy. So again, here we are. We're building logs of everything you're watching. How do we manage the consumer? And I actually have two questions, if anyone knows, because I don't. First is, what's the legal regime around TVs? Set-top boxes have a well-defined legal regime. Some of the handhelds and portable devices have a less well-defined legal regime when it comes to privacy. Does anybody know really what the legal regime is on privacy with TVs? And then second question is, how do we handle consumers? What's the consumer issue? Anybody want to jump in?
I think you're the best person.
Yeah, you actually asked the question.
I guess the reformed lawyer on the panel can talk about it. It's a good question. Does my TV have conditional access? If so, maybe I treat it as a navigation device under FCC rules.
Right.
That might be one way to look at it. You know, it really is the classic unanswered question. How much information are you able to gather under an end-user license agreement? How do you do this in phases, such that if you do want to start to make this more interactive and you do want to actually gather information, are you going to store that information and keep it, you know, make it persistent? A day, a week, a month? Are you going to use it to power an ad decision application that will allow you to do even more? I mean, we've been really looking at the privacy issues and trying to understand how to really pass what we see emerging as a bright line test, which is you literally have to educate the consumer as to what their data is going to be used for.
Right.
In clear, uncertain terms, in sixth grade English that everyone can understand, with the clear ability to opt in, and at any point in time, press the delete button. I want out of this very quickly. I mean, it's literally going in that direction. And we're trying to, like everybody else, trying to figure out how this is going to apply if we're just doing simple identification of shows to deliver value.
Sam, are you guys going to put a ACR log file clause in your EULA when a person put together a TV?
Well,
Is that click wrap on a new TV?
we did look at a lot of the privacy issue when we initially launched the App Store, not only US, but outside the market, especially if you go to places like Europe. It's a lot more stringent requirement when it comes to privacy. I think someone told me in US it's a consumer protection issue. In Europe, it's a human rights issue. But I think rather than getting to specific legal issues, I think it really comes down to a trade-off. So are you providing a compelling benefit? If the only benefit is I give you a better targeted ad, that's not a very compelling trade-off. But while you're managing 10,000s of channels plus 20 million video content, I'm going to use this technology to better recommend and personalize your viewing recommendation. That's a trade-off maybe they'll consider. So that's how I would really position it. What's a good trade-off that you can offer? Then if you make it opt-in, they'll opt in. But if it's not compelling, no one's going to opt into better targeted advertising.
Yeah.
But they actually might, if you offer them something. If I currently have to deliver a larger number of ads per hour because I know that only 5 out of X are relevant to each individual viewer, again, there's an economic model you can build that says, okay, I'll deliver you less ads. If you look online, there are people like Google have done with YouTube, the ad selector, I'll offer you a lower ad environment because you've chosen what ads you want. I think there are models that can do that.
I was thinking kind of on this topic, there's a little bit like Google Maps, right? I mean, when I first got my Android phone and it's asking you, do you want to enable location-based service? I'm like, I don't know that I want to do that. That's really creepy. But then I wanted to use Google Maps, and I really wanted to know how to get on the subway in New York, right? So I eventually turned it on and left it on because I was turning it on and off all the time. And of course, Google's providing me value. I really love the map feature, but they're using the information that I've agreed to share with them to target the ads to me based on the geography. And I think that that's kind of where we go with this. If there's a good reason to for the people to let it happen, to opt in, over time I think it'll be pretty common. All right, so can I have the slide deck back, please, on the screen? So last question is where this goes. I was required to take a wild stab at this for a client, so I did. This is a forecast for the number of connected TVs, flat panel TVs, orange, that will ship in the United States cumulatively through 2016. It's a ton, right? Of that 300 million screens, we're going to replace 200 million and change, right? So we just buy a hell of a lot of TVs. That's the reality of it, right? But the question then is, for this panel, what portion of those TVs are internet-enabled TVs, all right? And then what portion of those internet-enabled TVs actually connect to the internet, right? Which is actually a pretty high attach rate. And then of the internet-enabled TVs that connect to the internet, what portion of those are enabled with ACR technology? That's the blue box. Meets all those criteria, right? Gets to about 80, 90 million households cumulatively by 2016, all right? That's bigger than cable by 2016, all right? And it's generally going to be on the big screens because I think that the primary viewing location is the main TV being swapped out. So in terms of eyeball minutes, it's a pretty large portion. So kind of coming back to timing, I guess the first question is, I absolutely love if anybody has a different view of how these numbers grow over time. It's kind of hard to see all the math behind it. Any comments on what you see, kind of the start point of this, how quickly this will roll out in the United States? And then also, just generally speaking, if we get to 18 million TVs at the end of 2013, which isn't very far away, doesn't that start to energize the market? So what's the prognosis?
I don't doubt the numbers, but I think the processor that people carry in their pocket will grow proportionally, so that you'll have that kind of ACR technology in the TV, but that what we'll carry as personal devices, either as smartphones or tablets, that I think we'll stay on track for that to actually be a more powerful processor.
Right.
And I think that the impact of that will be that it's important, and there will be interesting things to do with content recognition in the television, but I think that it's actually more about mobile, and it's more about the companion device, and more about that augmented information being personal to you, and the TV still being display.
We'll see on that one. Marcelino, what's your view of kind of how quickly this market gets started? And I mean, you obviously see it from a supply chain standpoint. Are you expecting a good 2012 in terms of ACR rollouts?
Well, I think it all starts January of 2012. I think at the Consumer Electronics Show, I doubt that there'll be a major CE manufacturer without it. And if they're not showing it on the floor, they'll be showing it in their NDA booth.
Right.
So I definitely think, a couple things. Content identification, gesture
Right.
is another big one.
Right.
But I think you point out with the blue bar there, the real question, which is how many of these TVs are actually going to be connected
Right.
once people actually buy
That
them.
cuts the number about in half, by the way.
Yeah.
You have
And
to
we've
assume a
seen-
relatively low attach rate.
Right, we've seen numbers kind of a little bit higher, some a little bit lower, but I think you're, inside the ballpark in terms of that. Going forward, I think at least every major manufacturer that we're talking to is definitely looking at this space.
Right.
And, trying to wrestle with all the questions that we're talking about here.
Right, cool. And Sam, I guess question for you then. So ACR as a technology, I mean, you've talked about the percentage of your platform that's going to be internet enabled, it's going to be smart. Does the ACR technology, the various choices in front of you, does it really push the device so that you end up on the high end of your platform set? Or is this something that you could, if you wanted to, deploy on most? I'm talking about the technical footprint of it. Is it deployable on most of your 2012 TVs technically? I'm not asking for what you're going to do. I know you can't say that. I just mean, is it feasible to deploy it on a large range, or does it take a while for TVs to get robust enough to deploy ACR?
I think it really depends. I think there are various type of ACR technology ranging from watermarking and fingerprint. So it depends what kind of technology got adopted or chosen. The adoption and the requirement CPU envelope will vary. But I think it's safe to say that if you look beyond 2012 and 2013, based on what we're seeing from a chipset roadmap like Intel and others, I would say 100% of smart TV would be ACR capable from a performance threshold.
Right, okay.
But again, I think we talked a lot about these numbers as being fixed, but really comes down to, as a manufacturer, we're not going to try to add ACR as a feature and try to push consumer, you should buy this TV because ACR enabled. It really comes down to the compelling usage model, and just like as Netflix really changed the mindset of both the connection rate and how people use their over-the-top content, it's more those usage models. Oh, if I buy this TV and I can watch the same show as the gentleman from NBC mentioned, I only watch 3 advertising versus 6, maybe I'll buy that TV. So I think it really is up to the industry to come up with a compelling usage model and a business framework that both advertisers, broadcasters, manufacturers, and consumers really adopt this and push it.
Great. So, go ahead.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of the current TV chipsets, and certainly audio fingerprinting is a reasonable alternative in the short term. Video fingerprinting gets more interesting, I think, as you get into the 2012, 2013 area. I can't really speak to watermarking, but I know in our cases we're running, I've seen numbers of about 9% of 500 megahertz 34K MIPS CPU.
Okay.
So it's pretty reasonable from that standpoint,
Okay.
as far as the applications on these type of devices.
Okay. So I was going to say, one of my failings as a moderator is I never leave enough time for questions. There's like 3 minutes left. 5, awesome. Any questions from the field? I think we've got time for maybe 2 or 3. Yes, in the far corner.
I have a question for Zane.
Hi, Gerard.
So, Zane, I totally agree with you that 100% of television across all channels 24 hours a day should be interactive at some point. Whether that is 2 years from now, 5 years, or 10 years from now. What do you think is the biggest impediment to making that happen?
Well, I think it goes back to that fragmentation challenge, but more so, it's back to the content owners have to see a return on investment for creating that additional metadata or those additional apps or the potential experiences around that, right? Because, and this is a lesson I've learned the hard way over 20 years of interactive TV development. I was bragging earlier today that I was one of the guys who very early in the early 90s had to make demos for the DCT 2000, you know? And that was a good gig. Like what it would do in the future. And that was exciting. But what we learned when we work for a service provider, we can't really do anything with the content because legal affairs says we don't have the rights to do that. Right? Ultimately, it's like all of these amazing use cases and experiences that you might want to create with all of these phenomenal technologies. You don't have the rights. That you license the content for display and you have the right to insert a set number of ads. You really don't have the rights to start adding all kinds of cool stuff on top of it. And so the real challenge, I think why that evolution is going to take so long is because of this incredible fragmentation as a content owner. Which thing do I choose to move forward? And then at the same time, when you do choose to move them forward, it's this kind of inchworm effect because the content owners have to have approved the experience or, you know, in some way tacitly agreed. And that takes a lot of cooperation. And that's where we're focusing our efforts, is to really be able to, you know, take a lot of the pain out of that for a content owner. So it's like, look, this is my information. When someone calls and they want to exploit it on a new TV or on a mobile device or in some other thing, you know, they say, yeah, those are the APIs over there. Use that stuff, it's approved. So I think that's, even with that approach, I think it's still going to take some time.
But I think that as content producers, not just content owners, but as content producers see the value in enabling interactivity in their shows and the business rules and discussions and compensation all take that into account, that'll happen. I mean, I think they have to see it. You know, it takes all these are cycles, but you know, as you start to do these things, you know.
I totally agree with you, and I think that's why we're constantly trying to prototype new user experiences with our customers. That we're constantly trying to show those new user experiences, because without a new user experience, it's really hard to move anything forward.
We'll close on one comment on that because it's actually important. There really are two views of this going forward, and it might divide the room broadly in half. There are those who want to do this to TV, right? Who basically want to grab one of Chris's show and on an over-the-top basis say, aha, it's a Coke. I want to put a Coke up there. I'm going to go sell that to Coca-Cola, right? Without involving Chris or probably a little bit of Sam. Hard to get around him.
Not recommended.
No, well, but the point is, but there is a kind of an unenfranchised model, and then there's an enfranchised model where you're really working with the programming distributor. And at that point, the number of things that you can do where rights are less of an issue go up, right? On the other hand, you've got large, slow, wonderful partners to work with. No, I mean, you know, all the things that people love, the open space of doing their own thing, but as it turns out, most of the real revenue potential, I agree with you, is largely in working with the guys who actually own the rights.
Also, I guess if I
Or have
maybe
licensed
in a
them.
kind of controversial framework. So I think it makes a lot of sense for anyone to work with the content owners because they know most about the content. But I guess as a challenge, we have talked a lot about two screens. So as we talk about, if I'm watching something on, let's say, NBC and things are laid over, that feels a little bit gray. But let's say if I'm watching this,
Yeah, we
Okay,
would argue
no,
it's
no.
not great at all.
Let me, okay, well, I was putting that up versus, I'm watching something on 16-inch LG TV,
Yeah,
and I'm consuming some other content on iPad.
right.
And iPad knows I'm watching this and runs advertising. How about that space? That one is gray, or more grayer.
Yeah.
So I guess challenge to the content owner is, I think a lot of the interesting things are already happening by a lot of startups in Silicon Valley. And as a TV maker, we want things to happen on a TV. But if we're not careful, things might happen a lot quicker on a second device or Android, where there might not be that much levers to guide the direction.
We got into some good stuff at the end, but we're done. Thank you all very much.